Thank you, Piero, for this invitation. I'm very, very honored to be here and to have all these people in front of me. I just begin with I want to apologize for three things. The first one is my bad English accent, but I think you may understand me because you are Italian, I hope so. The second is I'm not an ophthalmologist, so I apologize. I'm a neurologist in France. And the third one is I changed a little bit the titles of my talks. But I will stay on diplopia and examination of eye movements. But I used one topic on diagnosis of diplopia with eye movement examinations, but peripheral eye movement examination. And then second topic on central neurological eye movement deficits, and with the examination of these eye movements, saccades, pursuit, etc. Is it fine with you? Okay. So what is diplopia? Well, diplopia is a double vision of a unique object. And you know that we have to decipher at the beginning whether diplopia is monocular, because monocular diplopia is due to obvious ophthalmological reason, or to functional or anorganic reason. And we won't talk about that today. And then you have binocular diplopia, which means that a patient will have acquired ocular misalignment of the eye that is acute or subacute, and which is mainly due to ocular motor palsy. For some exceptions, it may be due to other things, but you have to get this reasoning. So I propose you to go within this diagnosis of diplopia by first clinical examination, a systematic one, and then some reasoning about what you found, and then we will go through the main etiologies with the clinical cases. So first you have to take the history of the patient, so whether it's monocular or binocular, whether the patient has history of infancy strabismus, amblyopia, eye patching, and abnormal head posture, which is for congenital strabismus, but usually without diplopia. And you may ask the patient for his age, vascular risk factors, treatments. Then you have to stop on history of diplopia, whether it's acute, subacute, or progressive, whether it's horizontal, vertical, oblique, whether the evolution is stable, resolving, increasing, fluctuating, that is very important, whether it is worsened in some specific gaze directions, or for near or distant viewing, and whether there are some associated symptoms such as pain, or neurological or ophthalmological symptoms. And then you have to proceed to a kind of neurological examination, visual acuity, visual field, at the confrontation one, and never forget the pupils, the levator palpebrae, the orbits, and the optic disc. Then we go to these eye movements. So first of all, and I have just one slide on that, I'm a neurologist, not so used with congenital strabismus, but you have to ask if there is history of strabismus, amblyopia, abnormal head posture, and you may also look for latent nystagmus. I don't know if you are. So here is a patient who came for diplopia, and he has, it's very teeny, but when you occlude one eye, you can see this here. You will have right beating nystagmus, a small one, and on the other side, so you have right beating nystagmus here, and when you occlude the other side, very teeny left beating nystagmus, so you are in case of a small amblyopia, and we changed the discussion. So then the question is, which ocular muscle is involved? So the first step for you would be to observe obvious ocular deviation in primary position of gaze, and then look for amplitude of duction and versions. So here if it works. So I was showing you that on these videos that I was looking for versions, so both eyes viewing at the same times in all the direction of gaze, and duction, you look only one eye after the other. So if here you have obvious strabismus and limitation, it can be enough. But if you have an important limitation, you as ophthalmologist may use the forced duction test for looking for some mechanical restriction. To test heterotropia, you use the cover-uncover test. And here in a normal subject, so you look binocular vision, then you mask one eye. And on the other video, you see an obvious deviation of the eye, but just to show you that this test of heterotropia will show you that there's a hyper and exodeviation of the right eye. You can see nicely here. And then hypodeviation of the left eye. So it's just to test the relative ocular deviation from one eye to the other. And if you have obvious heterotropia, you can stop your examination there. But if you don't, you are going to the third and last step, and you test heterophoria with the cross-cover test to see the rest position of each eye relative to the other. So here in a normal subject, and here in a patient with a pathological exodeviation, exophoria of both eyes. So usually at the end of your examination, you can see which ocular muscle is involved, whether it's a medial or lateral rectus, superior or inferior rectus, inferior or superior oblique. And then you are going to your clinical reasoning. So if there is eye muscle palsy, where is the lesion? And you always have to reason like that. So is it the muscle? So you have the 6 extraocular muscles on the eyes, or the neuromuscular junction, and you have all these nerves innervating the muscles, or is it the nerves? So you have the 3 ocular motor nerves, the third one for the trochlear nerve, and the abducens nerve, and or is it central? So looking at the either the nuclei of the nerve or what we call the fascicular trajectory of the nerve within the brainstem. And you also have to think about, is it congenital, or is it what I call functional anorganic strabismus. So for orbital or muscular location, you can be helped with orbital syndrome. So here, you know that, red eye, chemosis, exophthalmia, sometimes pains, and sometimes if it's at the apex localization in the orbit, you can have loss of visual acuity. But also, muscle involvement can be multiple and progressive. And in this young lady, you have all eye movement that are slowed and limited in all directions. And it can be what we call external ophthalmoplegia, progressive external ophthalmoplegia. Neuromuscular junctions, what can help you? It's increased by effort, it's fluctuating in time, in intensity and in topography. It's not corresponding to a nerve territory, and ptosis is frequent. So here you have a lady at one part of the exam, and she had normal eye movement, and then a few minutes later, she had this huge vertical heterotropia. So it's fluctuating during your examination. So you think of neuromuscular junction, you think of myasthenia. And then in your reasoning, you have to think about, okay, it's not muscle, it's not the junction, so it can be the nerve or brainstem. So the nerve can be lesioned in the orbit, so you still have the orbital or apex syndrome. But behind the orbit, you have the cavernous sinus. So here you have all the 3 nerves that going there, and the the trigeminal nerve going there, and you can have horse nerve signs. So if you have all these nerves involved on one side, you think of a localization at the cavernous sinus. So here an example with a meningioma. And then it can be lesion in the subarachnoidean space. You never know. But if you have meningism, you have bilateral ocular motor involvement, or if you have other cranial nerve involvement, you think of this localization. And finally, it can be at a central level, so fascicular or nuclear. And usually, but not always, you can find some neurological signs that help you. So you always have to have this reasoning. And I say that because usually you see patients with abducting palsy, and everybody says it's a sixth nerve palsy. But abducting palsy is not always a sixth nerve palsy. It can be an involvement of the muscle or the junction. So take care of that in your reasoning each time. So at the end, the last step would be to find the main etiologies. So I have this diagram. It's not the best one, but you can see there's a lot of etiologies going to diplopia. So you have to find the best checkup to find the main etiologies of that. And I will go in some of the etiologies with some clinical case. But I need your help in this clinical case for the reasoning. So one first patient here, she's 70 years old, and she had subacute painful ophthalmoplegia. And you can see that she has abducting palsy of the left eye with orbital syndrome, chemosis, proptosis, and she has episcleral vein dilatation, and it's painful. So what is your main diagnosis here? Fistula. So carotido-cavernous fistula, and you would ask for MRI, angio-MRI, even CT scan with the injection. And what you are looking for here is mainly the dilatation of the superior orbital vein. Here, you can see here on MRI, angio-MRI here, and he's here on angiogram here. And so other main etiologies of painful orbital syndrome can be orbital tumors, myositis, idiopathic orbital inflammation, or even, which is very rare, the cavernous sinus thrombosis. So just going through the main etiologies, but without case here. And you also have the Graves' disease. And in Graves' disease, you have bilateral asymmetric involvement. The main ocular muscle involved is the inferior rectus. You also have lid retraction, as here. And on MRI or on CT scan, you can see this hypertrophy of extraocular muscles. And here, the inferior recti here. And there's little pain in Graves' disease. Okay, so another case, she's 74-year-old. She has diabetes mellitus and arterial hypertension. She complains of subacute painless diplopia for 1 week. So you can see on the video, I hope. On the right gaze is fine, and on left gaze, abduction palsy of the left eye, okay? So let's see, you have only that. Let's say we only have that. What is your main diagnosis in this patient? Sixth nerve palsy, but which origin? Yes, microvascular or microangiopathic sixth nerve palsy. We are all agree with that. So what do you have to rule out immediately? 74 years old, you suspect ischemic nerve palsy. Horton, you said? Yeah, giant arteritis, sorry. So you are looking for giant cell arteritis. Your first, so you immediately have to rule out that. With you are looking for inflammatory biological findings. And you still have to do an imaging in this patient to rule out tumor, at least CT scan or MRI if you can have it. And if you are still on the diagnosis of the microangiopathic sixth nerve palsy, you may just have to follow up the patients, take care of diabetes, hypertension, and you may do some recurrent clinical observation, at least for 3 months, because it has to go back and to resolve within 3 months. And if not, you have to go back to your etiologies and go back and at least for an MRI. So just a slide on vascular causes of ocular motor nerve palsies. So it's 40% of the etiologies of isolated ocular motor nerve palsies. So it's the main etiologies of them. And you have microangiopathy in 30% of them for each ocular motor nerve, 6th, 3rd, and 4th. But you have all other challenging and urgent vascular diagnosis for the 10% remaining. So we will see that later, but you have carotid aneurysm for the 3rd nerve palsy. You have the giant cell arteritis for all the nerve. You have brainstem ischemic or hemorrhagic stroke. And you have this carotido-cavernous fistula, and also this cavernous sinus thrombosis. That are all the vascular etiologies of ocular motor nerve palsies. And what are the other main diagnoses of abduction palsy? I would say the other main etiology is MS, multiple sclerosis in young patients. So you have, Okay. So here I showed you some example of lesion of MS here at the brainstem, and you are here at the fascicular level of the sixth nerve. You have also carcinomatosis and meningitis. You have to take care of that with the sixth nerve palsy. You have idiopathic intracranial hypertension, so I showed the papilledema. And you always think of myasthenia, sorry for that. So here, patient, you can see it's not just sixth nerve palsy because he has this ptosis, but it had a huge abduction palsy of the right eye. But he also has, you will see, adduction palsy of the right eye with the abducting nystagmus, with the ptosis. So you can't say it's just one nerve. You can't say it's the central. So it might be myasthenia. And I have a last example. I don't know if you know that and you know how to recognize, but it's often a differential diagnosis for abduction palsy, the convergent spasm. So here, this lady, you will see, she's complaining of horizontal diplopia. So you see this spasm. So it can be easy, okay? It's fluctuating. And you know it's spasm because you have meiosis within the same time. It is very important. And if you look on lateral gaze, I will show you, it looks like abduction palsy. And these patients often arrive at the clinics with the abduction palsy diagnosis. But it's not brainstem or here, you see? But it's not abduction palsy, it's just the spasm. And it's usually 99% of them are functional, anorganic. So you don't have to do this checkup, okay? So if it's not 6 microangiopathic in above 50, or MS below 50, so you take care of neoplasm, you take care of intracranial hypertension, you rule out convergent spasm, and you always think of myasthenia in all the cases. So I have here, not very often, but a case. So she has painful left ophthalmoplegia, so you saw the ptosis. And then you see here that she has adduction, elevation, and downward gaze palsy of the left eye. But you have to look for pupil. And you see that she has mydriasis without any reaction to light. So you have elevation, down, how you say it? Going down gaze, adduction, ptosis, mydriasis, third nerve palsy with pupil involvement, okay? And so you think of aneurysm, okay? You have to think aneurysm. So carotid artery aneurysm just above the cavernous sinus, and you are asking for angio-MR, angioscan, angiogram. So here you have angio-MR showing an aneurysm here, angiogram here showing this aneurysm in the lady I showed you. And you know that these aneurysms are developing just at some junction of arteries, between the carotid and the posterior cerebral artery, and just above the third nerve. And you always have pupil involvement because the parasympathetic pathway is just there at the surface of the nerve at this location. So you always have this pupil involvement, but not alone, with third nerve palsy. So you look for an aneurysm in front of complete or partial third nerve palsy with pupil involvement, even if painless, and whatever the age of the patient. And with pupillary sparing, again, you look for giant cell arteritis above 50, microangiopathy in diabetes and hypertension, and other etiologies can be compressive, vascular, inflammatory. You have a lot of bunch of etiologies. Okay, so another case, she's 90 years old, no medical history, and she complains of subacute, very painful, right ophthalmoplegia. And when you look at her, you find a deficit in the territory of the sixth nerve and the third nerve on the same side. And she has the above part of the trigeminal territory with neuralgia. So what is your main topographic diagnosis? Okay, so you have a cavernous sinus syndrome. And what do you plan? It's easy. I'm a neurologist, MRI, and lumbar puncture. And what are you thinking of in this patient? Painful cavernous syndrome, cavernous sinus syndrome. Okay, so I show you the MRI. Yeah, well, it's subacutely and very, very painful. So meningioma can be that. So you have an MRI, and you see here, you have the coronal view at the cavernous sinus topography, and you have this involvement here. So you have some lesion so you think of Tolosa-Hunt, so it can be tumor, infection, inflammation, but you think of Tolosa-Hunt syndrome in this young patient. You do lumbar puncture, you are looking for lymphoma on the lumbar puncture, but if there is nothing, you can give her steroid treatments. And then there's immediate pain improvement, and when you do the MRI a few months later, you don't see anything. So it's one of the etiology of painful ophthalmoplegia. And in this patient, and in a lot of patients, a year later, she has the same symptoms, but on the left eye. So left-sided painful ophthalmoplegia, you did the MRI, and you have the same lesion on the other part of on the cavernous sinus here. And then she had steroids and normalization, so it's usually recurrent at least one time. So other main etiologies of cavernous sinus syndrome, you have to take care of something that is not very frequent, but it's tricky, is posterior drainage fistula. So you know the fistula with the anterior drainage, but here you don't have the orbital syndrome, but the drainage is posterior, so you see here on the angiogram that something is wrong here, going to the veins here at an arterial time, and here you see just this kind of image on the cavernous sinus, so it's tricky. Pituitary apoplexia, it's an emergency, you have to make this diagnosis. It gives you unilateral or bilateral ophthalmoplegia due to cavernous sinus melting, and you have to ask for specific imaging, because on scanner, on CT scan, you don't see it. So you have to ask MRI in the sagittal plane or coronal plane to see this adenoma and involvement and hemorrhagic involvement, which explains the apoplexia. You have also to think and to take care of sphenoid sinusitis. So here in this patient with a left-sided ophthalmoplegia, and within this sinusite, there's one thing you don't have to miss is fungal infections in patients with immunodepression, diabetes, corticoids, or treatments. because it's just something that is lethal in more than 80% of the cases, so you have to take care of that. And they're going to the ENT mainly. It can be meningioma, it can be lymphoma, and it can be also giant carotid aneurysm within the cavernous sinus. Okay, so let's go further. She's 33 years old, no history, and she complains of bilateral hand paresthesia followed by binocular diplopia within 3 days. So on examination, you have quadridistal paresthesia, sensory ataxia, abolished tendon reflex, and ophthalmoplegia. So I show you when she arrived. So on left gaze, she had this kind of bilateral involvement. Right gaze, mainly. You also have, so you have abduction and adduction limitation of up gaze also, and down gaze is not good, at least in this eye. So in your reasoning, it can be maybe peripheral. It can be progressive external ophthalmoplegia, but it's acute, and she has this ataxia. So you think of Miller-Fisher, but you do the lumbar puncture, it can be normal at the beginning, MRI is normal, biology is normal, but anti-GQ1B is positive, which gives you the diagnosis of Miller-Fisher, which is something close to Guillain-Barré syndrome, but gives you ataxia and ophthalmoplegia. So she had some immunoglobulin, IV immunoglobulin, and 5 days later she was just fine. Okay, so you think of Miller-Fisher. So the main etiologies of multiple bilateral ocular motor nerves, meningitis, but it's obvious, Miller-Fisher syndrome, take care of that, intracranial hypertension for abduction palsy of both sides, but it can also be intracranial hypotension, Wernicke syndrome, you can have all types of ocular motor involvement, giant cell arteritis because it can involve multiple nerves, pituitary apoplexia because it's often bilateral, and always think to ocular myasthenia. And I have a last case, but I think I'm not sure it's very interesting for ophthalmologists. So he's 60-year-old, dyslipidemia, and he had post-traumatic occurrence of vertical binocular diplopia. Just to show you his examination, because I think, at least for neurologists, it's not easy to find a deficit in the direction of the superior oblique. So here, in downward gaze of the left eye, you don't see much. That's why the cover-uncover test is very useful, I think. I hope you will see that. Donc I show you in the direction of action of left superior oblique. It's not a good movie. So, sorry for that. So the cover-uncover test showed this vertical heterotropia that gives you the diagnosis of fourth, or at least superior oblique involvement. But if it's traumatic, you are thinking of traumatic trochlear nerve palsy. Okay, but you still have to rule out traumatic vertical diplopia, but you know that the orbital flow fracture also, so you have to image these patients. So the main etiologies of fourth nerve palsy are congenital, traumatic, microangiopathic, you have to think of that, and myasthenia. So I will finish on this algorithm here, which is not the best one, but I think just to think of the different diagnoses of diplopia.